Most people don't realize how loud their life has become. Not because of traffic, not because of social media, not even because of other people, but because they are constantly explaining themselves, explaining their choices, explaining their boundaries, explaining their silence, explaining why they said no, explaining why they changed. And every explanation feels harmless, reasonable, polite, but slowly, it drains something deep inside you. Let me ask you something quietly. When was the last time you made a decision and felt at peace with it without needing anyone to understand? For most people, that moment is rare, because from a young age, we are trained to justify our existence. If you rest, you must explain why you're tired. If you grow, you must explain why you changed. If you walk away, you must explain why you couldn't stay. And Stoicism saw this trap thousands of years ago. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, in essence, "Do not waste time arguing about what a good person is. Be one." He wasn't just talking about morality. He was talking about silence. The kind of silence that comes when you stop defending your inner world. Here's the truth most people never hear. The more you explain yourself, the more control you give away. Because explanations are not neutral, they are negotiations. And when you explain yourself to someone who has already decided how they see you, you're not being understood, you're being evaluated. This is where life becomes noisy, not outside, inside. You start rehearsing conversations that never happen. You replay moments you wish you'd handled differently. You imagine objections that may never come, and your mind never rests. This is not wisdom. This is mental exhaustion. The Stoics believed that peace does not come from convincing others. It comes from alignment with your own principles. Epictetus taught that some things are within your control, and many things are not. Other people's opinions sit firmly in the second category. Yet most people spend their entire lives trying to control what cannot be controlled. They explain so they won't be misunderstood. They explain so they won't be judged. They explain so they won't be rejected. But here is the uncomfortable truth. People who want to misunderstand you will. People who want to judge you will. People who want to reject you don't need an explanation. And the Stoic knows this. That is why silence is not weakness in Stoicism. It is strength. When you stop explaining yourself, something strange happens. At first, it feels uncomfortable, even scary, because silence removes your shield. You're no longer managing impressions. You're no longer correcting assumptions. You're no longer chasing approval. And your ego protests. But if you sit with it, if you don't rush to fill the silence, you begin to feel something else. Relief. The relief of no longer carrying the emotional weight of other people's expectations. The Stoics did not seek isolation. They sought inner independence. They understood that a person who constantly explains themselves is still living under invisible authority. Not a king, not a ruler, but the imagined court of public opinion. And that court is never satisfied. Explain once, they want more detail. Explain again, they question your motive. Explain again, they doubt your sincerity. There is no end. So the Stoic steps back, not in anger, not in arrogance, but in quiet self-respect. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, "I do my duty, the rest does not concern me." That is not detachment from people. That is detachment from noise. And here is the shift that changes everything. When you stop explaining yourself, your actions start speaking instead. Consistency replaces persuasion. Calm replaces justification. Presence replaces performance. You no longer need to announce who you are. People feel it. And those who don't were never meant to walk with you anyway. In the next part, We're going to explore why explaining yourself actually invites more disrespect, not less, and why the calmest people are often the most powerful in the room. Stay with me. Most people think explaining themselves is a form of clarity, but in reality, it's often a form of fear. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of being judged, fear of losing approval. The Stoics understood something most people never realize. The more you explain yourself, the more power you give away. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself that it is not necessary to persuade everyone of your intentions, not because people are evil, but because they are busy with their own interpretations. When you explain yourself too much, you are not communicating. You are negotiating your worth. Think about it. Every time you over-explain, you are saying, without words, "Please understand me so I can feel okay." But Stoicism teaches a harder, quieter truth. Your peace cannot depend on other people understanding you. Because most people aren't listening to understand. They're listening to respond, or to judge, or to compare your choices to their own insecurities. And when you try to correct every misunderstanding, you place yourself in an endless loop. Explain once, they misunderstand. You explain again, they twist it. You explain deeper, now you're defensive, now you're drained. This is how noise enters your life. The Stoics saw this clearly. They didn't call it over-explaining. They called it enslavement to opinion. Epictetus taught that if you want to be free, you must accept that some people will misunderstand you and live peacefully anyway. That idea terrifies most people because they've built their identity on being seen correctly. But here's the uncomfortable truth. You can explain yourself perfectly and still be misunderstood, not because you failed, but because perception is never under your control. So the Stoic asks a different question. Not, do they understand me, but am I acting in alignment with my values? That shift changes everything, because when your actions match your principles, explanations become unnecessary. A calm man does not argue for his calm. A disciplined person does not justify their discipline. A focused mind does not explain why it ignores distractions. It simply moves forward. And here's where life begins to grow quieter. When you stop explaining yourself, people react in one of two ways. Some become uncomfortable because they can no longer pull you into debate or control you through misunderstanding. Others begin to respect you because silence, when grounded, signals certainty. This is not arrogance, it's self-trust. The Stoics believed that dignity is preserved through restraint, not through convincing others, but through governing yourself. Think of a Roman general standing before a noisy crowd. He does not shout to prove authority. He waits. The silence speaks for him. That's what happens when you stop explaining yourself. You stop chasing validation. You stop leaking energy. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head long after they're over. And something strange happens. Your mind becomes spacious again. Because most mental noise doesn't come from events. It comes from replaying explanations we wish had landed better. What if I'd said it differently? Maybe I should clarify. I don't want them to think the wrong thing. The Stoics cut this loop at the root. They asked, is this within my control? If not, release it. Silence becomes a boundary, not a weapon, not avoidance, a boundary. You don't owe everyone an explanation for your growth. You don't owe clarity to people committed to misunderstanding you. You don't owe your peace to anyone. And this is where your presence changes. When you speak less, people listen more. When you explain less, your actions carry more weight. When you stop defending yourself, you stop needing defense. Life doesn't get louder when you stop explaining yourself. It gets quieter, cleaner, more focused. And in that quiet, you begin to hear yourself again, your values, your instincts, your direction. In the next part, we'll explore how silence transforms your relationships, why some people pull away when you stop explaining, and why that is not a loss, but a filter. If this message resonates with you, pause for a moment. Give this video a like. It helps this wisdom reach someone who may need it today. And if you're learning to protect your peace instead of negotiating it, subscribe to Real Stoic Word, because silence is not weakness. It is strength under control. Most people think silence is weakness. They think if you don't explain yourself, others will misunderstand you, judge you, control the narrative. But the Stoics understood something most people never learn. Silence is not absence. Silence is authority. The moment you stop explaining yourself to everyone, life doesn't get louder, it gets quieter. And that quiet is where power lives. Think about how exhausting explanation really is. Explaining why you made a choice, explaining why you said no, explaining why you're different, explaining your intentions to people who already decided how they feel about you. Marcus Aurelius once reflected that a man wastes his life when he tries to manage the opinions of others instead of mastering his own mind. Because here's the truth most people don't want to face. People who demand explanations are rarely seeking understanding. They are seeking control. They want reassurance. They want justification. They want you to bend your reality so they can feel comfortable. And every time you explain yourself unnecessarily, you hand them power. The Stoics believed your actions are your explanation, not your words, not your defenses, not your arguments, your consistency, your calm, your direction. When you stop explaining, something fascinating happens. People project less onto you. They interrupt you less. They question you less. Not because they suddenly understand you, but because they sense something firm beneath your silence. Epictetus taught that if you wish to improve, you must accept appearing foolish to others. And this is one of the hardest lessons. When you stop explaining, some people will misunderstand you. Let them. When you stop defending yourself, some will think they've won. Let them. When you stop over-communicating, some will feel uncomfortable. That discomfort is not your responsibility. Here's where most people get stuck. They confuse clarity with over-explanation. Clarity is knowing your reason. Over-explanation is begging others to accept it. Stoicism teaches that your peace is not built on approval. It's built on alignment. Are you acting according to your values? Are you living with integrity? Are you choosing what is right over what is popular? If the answer is yes, you owe no one a speech. Seneca warned that a man who explains himself to everyone becomes a servant to everyone, because explanation never ends. There will always be another opinion, another critic, another misunderstanding. If you try to satisfy them all, you lose yourself. This is why quiet people are often the most misunderstood, but also the most respected. Think about the people you respect most. They don't overtalk. They don't justify every decision. They don't panic when misunderstood. They move. They act. They let time speak for them. Silence forces others to confront themselves. When you stop explaining, people are left alone with their assumptions, and that's uncomfortable. But Stoicism is not about comfort. It's about freedom. There's a deep inner shift that happens when you stop explaining yourself. Your nervous system relaxes, your mind becomes clearer, your energy returns to you. Because explanation is emotional labor, and the Stoics were masters of conserving inner energy. They knew where to spend it, and more importantly, where not to. You don't need to explain why you're focused. You don't need to explain why you're disciplined. You don't need to explain why you choose peace over noise. The moment you stop trying to be understood by everyone, you finally understand yourself. And here's the paradox. When you stop explaining, the right people understand you more clearly than ever. Because clarity doesn't shout, it stands still. If this part of the message resonates with you, take a moment and like this video. It helps this wisdom reach someone who desperately needs quiet in their life right now. Now let's talk about something even deeper. Why silence feels so threatening to most people, and why embracing it transforms not just how others see you, but how you experience life itself. Most people are afraid of silence because silence removes validation. No feedback, no reassurance, no confirmation, just you and your choices. Stoicism prepares you for that. It trains you to live without applause, because the Stoic goal is not to be admired, it's to be unshaken. When you stop explaining yourself, you are no longer negotiating your worth, you are declaring it. And in the next part, we'll go deeper into how this quiet strength reshapes your relationships, your confidence, and your inner peace permanently. Stay with me. This is where everything comes together. There comes a moment in every life when silence becomes strength. Not the silence of fear, not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of someone who finally understands something most people never do, that you don't need to be understood to live well. Marcus Aurelius wrote something close to this idea when he reminded himself that it is possible to live a good life without ever explaining it to anyone. Not because others don't matter, but because your peace matters more. When you stop explaining yourself, something unexpected happens. The noise fades, the tension dissolves, and life becomes quieter, not empty, clear. This is the final shift, the point where Stoic truth stops being an idea and becomes a way of being. Because explanation is not neutral. Every time you explain yourself, you give away a piece of authority. You say, even if unconsciously, I need your agreement for this to be valid. But Stoicism teaches the opposite. Your actions don't require applause. Your choices don't need permission. Your values don't need consensus. Epictetus warned that if you allow others to define what is good for you, you will live as their servant, and most people do. They explain why they said no. They explain why they changed. They explain why they need space. They explain why they're different now. And the more they explain, the more resistance they meet. Because explanation invites debate, and debate invites control. When you stop explaining yourself, you close the door to unnecessary conflict. You don't argue. You don't justify. You don't over-clarify. You simply act. And that unsettles people. Not because you're wrong, but because they're used to access. They're used to questioning you, correcting you, pulling you back into old roles. Silence removes that leverage. This is why life becomes quieter, not because problems disappear, but because you stop amplifying them. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head. You stop preparing defenses. You stop reliving moments where you wish you'd said things differently. You realize something profound. You don't owe anyone your inner world. The Stoics believed that the only thing fully under your control is your judgment, not opinions, not reactions, not outcomes, judgment. And when you stop explaining yourself, you protect it. You conserve energy. You begin to move differently. You say less and mean more. You respond slower, but with precision. You choose silence, not as avoidance, but as mastery. This is not coldness. This is clarity. There's a misconception that calm people are passive. Stoics were anything but passive. They were decisive, disciplined, unshakable. They understood that most battles are optional, and that explaining yourself is often the first step into a battle that doesn't matter. When you stop explaining, people reveal themselves. Some respect you more. Some grow uncomfortable. Some drift away. And that's not loss. That's alignment. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that he would encounter interference, ignorance, and misunderstanding, and none of it had to disturb him unless he allowed it. This is where freedom lives, not in convincing others, but in no longer needing to. Life becomes quieter because you stop arguing with reality. You accept that not everyone will understand your growth. You accept that some people prefer the old version of you. You accept that silence is often the most dignified response, and in that acceptance, peace takes root. Here's the final truth. The moment you stop explaining yourself, you stop living on trial. You stop auditioning for approval. You stop negotiating your worth. You begin to live from principle, not reaction, and that changes everything. People may talk, they may assume, they may misunderstand, but none of that touches you, because your life no longer needs narration. It speaks through consistency, through boundaries, through calm presence, and that is the Stoic way. Not loud, not defensive, not performative. Quiet, steady, unmoved. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to like the video. It helps this wisdom reach someone who may be overwhelmed by noise right now. And if you're walking this path of inner discipline, subscribe to Real Stoic Word. This channel exists for those who value calm over chaos, clarity over noise, and self-mastery over validation. Comment below, silence is strength. Let that be your reminder. Thank you for staying until the end. Stay grounded, stay unshaken, stay stoic.